Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome and I'm here after the 1 week break to break down UFC Vegas 62, which is headlined by Grasso versus Viviane Araujo. Just before we get into the breakdowns though, as always, there is a Base AI recap, obviously not from last week because there was no UFC event, but from the week before at UFC Vegas 61. That's on our YouTube channel in the Base AI playlist, so make sure you check that out. There was a really solid gem in there as well, and there was a couple of good predictions also. So again, make sure if you're interested in the algorithms, if you're interested in the artificial intelligence, that you check out the Base AI recap. And also, just very quickly, last weekend, as I've already mentioned now 3 times, there was no UFC, so I did another special episode of the MMA Play 365 on the Moneyline podcast, which was called MMA Betting 5 Tips and Tricks. So again, that's in the special episodes playlist on our YouTube channel. So if you are interested in, learning more about the MMA gambling, MMA handicapping, how I go about my bets and some bets, tricks and tips that I use when playing bets, then again, make sure you check that out. But without any further ado, why you're all here is because of the breakdowns, the predictions, the analysis, and that's exactly what we're going to jump into now with UFC Vegas 62, headlined by Grasso versus Araujo, and that's obviously exactly where we start. Now, this is a rescheduled fight from a couple of months ago, and a couple of months ago it was actually a 3-round fight. Now it's a 5-round fight. Now, I personally thought when it was a 3-round fight that Araujo probably should have been favoured, but she was a very slight underdog. But now it's 5 rounds, the line is even wider, and I kind of do understand why Grasso would be the favourite in this spot. And probably the main reason why, and I think this is going to be the biggest talking point of this fight throughout fight week, and all the analysis that we're going to hear, is the gas tank of Viviane Araujo, because to the eye, she visibly does slow down in most of her fights, and every single UFC fight that she's had has gone into the 3rd round. All of them bar one gone to a decision. She got a finish in round 3, which is very interesting. I'll touch upon that in a minute. So she has gone 3 rounds every fight in the UFC, and she does slow down a little bit. She starts really fast. She's got really slick movement in and out of range. But the main telltale of her slowing down is the fact that movement does subside a little bit the longer the fight goes on. Now, what I decided to do is look into the scorecards and see which round she was actually losing. And to be fair, to my surprise as well, I found that she actually wins more round 3s than she loses. And that was really interesting to me, because there is this perception about her that she's got a poor gas tank, and actually after looking at that, I don't think it's a gas tank issue. I just think it's a pacing issue throughout the fight and overexerting a little bit too much early on, and therefore she drops the 2nd round but then wins the 3rd round. And what's that going to be like over a 5-round fight? And it is tough to gauge, but I do genuinely think that it's not a gas tank issue she's got, it's more of a pacing issue. And for this fight, she's got to be training for 5 rounds, so she's got to be mindful of the fact that she can't fight how she's fought previously in the UFC, because if this fight does go to a 4th and 5th round, she's just not going to be there. So I think it's going to be a pacing issue. I think it's something that she's definitely going to have worked on for this fight. From Grasso's perspective, Grasso doesn't have perfect 3-round fights either. Her volume can drop off a little bit. Again, I'm not saying she's got any gas tank or cardio issues, but I'm just saying the telltale style of Grasso is that she starts really high volume, and then the volume can drop off a little bit the longer the fight goes on. So how they match up stylistically is interesting, because from a striking perspective, Grasso's the better technical striker. She's the fighter that I think is probably going to have more volume over a 5-round fight, which is the reason, in my opinion, why she's favoured on the betting lines in this fight. So I think Grasso's definitely got advantages from that perspective. But from Araujo's striking, early on, she's a nightmare. She's got hard low kicks. She's got power in her hands. She's got aggression, forward pressure. She'll throw knees inside the clinch. So there is a contrast of styles here, and I feel like it's going to be that volume approach from Grasso versus the aggression from Araujo. The other thing that stands in Grasso's favour is the fact that she can fight really well on the back foot as well as moving forwards, which is going to help her in this fight also. Then when you look to the wrestling and grappling, I think Araujo is the better wrestler. I think the grappling's close, but again, I think that Araujo would do better work on top than what Grasso might do on bottom. So all in all, I just think it's a really close fight when you really break down the finer details. I think it's one of those fights that we might see go to a decision, and then we're left thinking, well, actually Grasso won those 2 rounds, Araujo won those 2 rounds, and I don't know what's happening with the other round. The one thing I will say is the judges, again, they tend to not be looking towards the point-scoring fighters, the fighters that are trying to cruise, and they tend to favour the fighters that are looking like they are trying to finish the fight and knock their opponent out or submit their opponent. And I think that side favours Araujo, but depending on if Araujo does slow down significantly for 2 or 3 rounds, volume is king at some point, and it would be at that point if Araujo slowed down. Like I said, whichever way I look at this, I just feel like it's a really close fight, a fight that could really go in numerous ways. And ultimately, in those types of fights, I do tend to side with the underdog. So I am going to be doing the same here, and I'm going to be picking Viviane Araujo to win this fight. And in the next fight, the co-main event, we've got Jonathan Martinez versus Cub Swanson. And I think that Cub Swanson is relatively live in this fight. I'm not sure if he actually gets his hand raised and gets the win by the end of the fight when all is said and done. I think Jonathan Martinez, that youthfulness about him, I know that that's not too much to go on, but I do feel that youthful energy, the fact that he is still climbing in the UFC, he is still developing, he is still getting better. And against Cub Swanson, when you're looking at where the fight's won and lost, I think it is more likely to be won and lost on the feet. I wouldn't actually be surprised to see a little bit of wrestling and grappling from either side. I think both fighters could potentially pull a surprise here and, shoot a takedown and try and get the fight down to the mat. But I don't think each of these fighters is going to have a significant enough advantage in a top side position over their opponent to be able to keep the fight down on the mat for significant periods of time. I think the fight is going to be won and lost on the feet. I think the speed is going to be a key in this fight. I think the movement's going to be key in this fight. And where Cub Swanson's more boxing heavy, I feel like Jonathan Martinez mixes things up a little bit. He's more varied with his attacks. He'll throw kicks to the legs, to the body, to the head. He'll switch stances a little bit more. And like I said, he's got some hands as well. So I feel the more varied striker is Jonathan Martinez. I think he's going to be a little bit quicker. I think he's going to be a little bit of a faster mover. And I do think that, again, he's going to have some of that youthful energy inside the cage as well. And in a fight that is more than likely going to be won and lost on the feet striking, I'm going to be picking Jonathan Martinez to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fun one in the flyweight division. We've got Askarov versus Brandon Royval. And again, this is going to be really interesting because I'll start straight away with Brandon Royval's holes in his game. His defensive wrestling is definitely something that he could or should need to work on. Askarov has got really good takedowns, although the takedown completion percentage numbers don't really paint a true picture because he's a chain wrestler, and chain wrestlers do tend to have a slightly lower completion rate. But Askarov's wrestling is really good. Brandon Royval's defensive wrestling is definitely the biggest flaw and hole in his game. However, where this fight gets interesting is Brandon Royval doesn't care. He'll get taken down. He's absolutely fine with that. He's a black belt in BJJ. He's one of the quickest scramblers that I think I've ever seen in MMA from a chain and submission perspective. I've seen him chain armbars, triangles, omoplatas, just in such a quick space of time. Again, I've watched tape on him previously and I had to stop it and rewind it and rewatch just because things happen so fast. The dude's an absolute nightmare on the mat. Trying to deal with him, trying to pin him down, and he's a submission threat, whether he's on bottom or top as well. And I actually think that his sweep and then top game is actually pretty good also. So it's going to be an interesting fight. Then when you look at the striking, Askarov is by far the more technical striker. He puts combinations together better. He'll throw fundamentals as well. And as the old saying goes, fundamentals do win fights. But then Brandon Royval on the other side, he'll just crash forwards. He's got no technique about him. He'll come forwards. He'll throw hard kicks to the body. He'll throw spin attacks. He'll throw big right hands. He switches stances as well. And he'll just crash into his opponent because he just doesn't care if his opponent takes him down. Or it might even put him in a position where he can shoot a takedown and get the fight down to the mat. So it's going to be one of those fights where it's going to be the more technical, more better put together fighter in Askarov versus the absolute car crash of a fighter in Brandon Royval. And I actually think it's going to make for a relatively close fight, because there's going to be moments in this fight where it's just 100 miles an hour, and anything that Askarov does from a technical perspective, Brandon Royval's going to give himself every chance of being able to really start pulling some of this fight back from that technical perspective with Askarov. And like I said, I think it's just going to make a really close fight. I think it's going to be a really fun fight as well. It's a high-level fight at the top of the division. And again, in these close fights, I am going to slightly side with the underdog, even though I do think Askarov is the better mixed martial artist. He's the better fighter. And he's actually probably the fighter, well, not probably, he is the fighter that I could definitely see getting a title shot over Brandon Royval. I think that Askarov could be a potential future champion as well, but styles make fights, and in this fight I just feel that Brandon Royval is live enough in this spot to be able to get the win, so I'm picking Brandon Royval to win this fight. And in the next fight we've got an interesting one between Dusko Todorovic and Jordan Wright, and it's a tough one because it's hard trusting Dusko Todorovic, because he is a fighter that has been finished. He's a fighter that does leave his chin hanging in the air. I've said it, I've liked Dusko Todorovic as a fighter. As a fighter, he's so skilled, but I've said it since he started in the UFC, he just hangs that chin out way too much, and you have seen in the latter fights, in his last one or two fights, he has tried to tuck that chin a little bit more, but again, old habits die hard, as they say, and that chin is always out. Jordan Wright can hit hard. He did rock very slightly Silva in moments in that fight against Bruno Silva, so the dude can hang on the feet. He can crack. Dusko Todorovic is a risk with his chin hanging high. However, when you look at the complete mixed martial artist, I do think Dusko Todorovic is probably the better striker here. I think he's the better wrestler. I think he's the better grappler. I think he's going to be stronger and more dominant inside clinch positions. So I think all the ranges, from the kicking range to the boxing range to the clinching, I just feel that Dusko Todorovic is going to be a better fighter than Jordan Wright. It's just that trust issue with Dusko Todorovic, the fact that he does hang his chin out there, that he is liable to be knocked out. Jordan Wright does hit hard, so there's always that side, that's the nagging side of it. But from a style perspective, from a skill set perspective, Dusko Todorovic, in my opinion, is the better fighter wherever the fight goes, and I am going to be siding with that. So I'm picking Dusko Todorovic to win this fight. In the next fight, this is interesting as well. We've got Misha Cirkunov versus Alonzo Menifield. Now, it's interesting because of how the fight could potentially play out. There's a couple of ways. Now, Alonzo Menifield is athletic, he's explosive, he's powerful, he's an absolute unit. I've said this for years. I don't understand how he makes 205 pounds, but he does. And I think that this is a big issue for Cirkunov, because Misha Cirkunov has been knocked out. He is liable to getting hit. And at 205, these guys just hit much harder. And I feel that that's why he did have that spell down at middleweight, because of the guys just hitting so hard. And that's exactly what he's getting with Menifield here. Now, the issue with Menifield is, for how athletic, explosive and powerful he is, the dude just always finds himself wanting to clinch up with his opponents against the cage, maybe using that strength. But the problem is, because he's so stacked, he's so physically big, the gas tank and the lactic acid in the muscles, it really affects him when he starts clinching, and he tires out because of it. And I feel like if he does overly clinch here, I think Misha Cirkunov is no pushover inside the clinch. I think he is relatively strong. He's got that old man strength. I think he's got decent takedowns as well that he can hit against the cage. And I think if this fight goes to the mat, it's a complete mismatch. And I feel like Misha Cirkunov would absolutely roll all over Menifield on the mat, because he's a legit BJJ black belt. I think if Menifield gets tired from the clinch, that's problem number one. And like I said, I just feel that there's a big gap in skill if the fight hits the mat in the world of the grappling. But I don't know. I feel like, again, there's trust issues with Cirkunov because of that chin. Not that he leaves it hanging out, like I mentioned about Todorovic in the last breakdown, but I feel like he can get touched. I feel like Alonzo Menifield does pack power. I think he's going to know that Cirkunov's been knocked out a couple of times now quite badly, and I think he'll probably try to exploit that. I just feel that this fight the betting lines should be much closer than what they are, because there is a big gap in skill on the mat. I'm just not quite sure it hits the mat. I think if Alonzo Menifield really lets his strikes go in that first round, I think he will find himself being able to land 1, 2, maybe 3 hard and clean and flush punches on Cirkunov, which I don't think Cirkunov will be able to withstand. And for those reasons, I am going to be siding with Alonzo Menifield to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got Martinez versus Brandon Davis. And I think this is going to be quite a close fight, if I'm being honest. Martinez has actually impressed me in the UFC. I wasn't sure what to expect after losing to Draco Rodriguez on the Contender Series, but he's coming to the UFC. He's beat Guido Canetti, who we've seen is actually on a tear right now. And he also had good moments against Ronnie Lawrence as well. Ronnie Lawrence ultimately did get the better of him with the wrestling, but he did stay in the fight all the way, which was impressive. You know, it showed heart and determination and fighting Martinez. But Brandon Davis has also got fight and heart in him as well. And I feel like from a technical perspective, I think Martinez is the better striker. I think Brandon Davis is more of a grinder. I think he might have advantages just trying to clinch up with Martinez, maybe drag him down to the mat. Martinez will stand back up, then, you know, reshoot the takedown, retake him down, and then it'll be a stand up down type of dirty, ugly, grinding fight. I feel that's the type of fight that favours Brandon Davis. Now, the other thing that I want to touch upon as well is some of the losses that Brandon Davis has took at the highest level in the sport, which is obviously in the UFC. He's lost against Bakary Danar, who is, in my opinion, one of the more explosive, dangerous strikers in the division. He's lost against Giga Chikadze, who's an absolute phenom. He's lost against Kyung Ho Kang, who, again, has been around for years and he's good everywhere. He's lost against Zabit Magomed Sharipov. He's lost against Enrique Barzola. So these fights that Brandon, like, his record is very deceiving. Like, the fights that he's lost are against seriously good fighters that would all likely beat Martinez as well. So again, I think it's a close fight. I do think it's a fight that if Martinez can really start doing some good work on the feet, he will pack power, he will pack some volume, he does have that touch of death as well, so I feel like if there's a finish, it's probably slightly more on the edge of Martinez, but I also think if he is trying to take Brandon Davis out and then Brandon Davis is trying to clinch and grind, then the judges, should it go there, will favour the style of Martinez more, so I kind of feel Martinez might have the decision upside. I think it's going to be a close fight, but the two finishing and decision upsides are slightly in the favour of Martinez, in my opinion. For that reason, I'm picking Martinez to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a short notice fight with a newcomer. We've got Joanderson Brito versus Lucas Alexander. And I'm actually a little bit disappointed because I was really looking forward to Joanderson Brito versus Melsik Bagdasaryan as well. I think that was going to be probably one of the best fights on the entire card. But Lucas Alexander's a game opponent. And I do think because of that, it's going to be a really aggressive fight. I think Joanderson Brito's got to be careful though. I could see Joanderson Brito actually coming forwards, breaking that range, closing the distance, getting inside boxing range, landing something on Lucas Alexander and just knocking him out, a bit like how it happened with Andre Fili. But I think for Brito to do that, he's got to get Lucas Alexander on the back foot. I think Lucas Alexander does fight on the back foot a little bit more than what he should and probably what he's capable of as well. And the reason I say that is because when Lucas Alexander does come forward, he does have some good straight punches. He does have good head kicks as well, especially inside close quarters. He's got one of them styles where he can quickly whip up a head kick even though he's quite close to his opponent, and it's probably more in boxing range than the kicking range. And like I said, Lucas Alexander can really be aggressive himself. But the thing is, I feel like coming in on short notice against Joanderson Brito, the other side to this as well is I've seen Lucas Alexander be susceptible to be taken down, and that's where the other aspect of Joanderson Brito's game comes in, because he does have a good entry into a double leg takedown. He will have opportunities to take Lucas Alexander down. He's not so much a phenom grappler, but he is definitely comfortable on top, in top position, and if his opponent stands back up, he can reshoot with his wrestling, or he can just exit back out into space and start to look exploding with big hard shots again, leg kicks, big hooks to their head, really having that aggressive forward pressure game. And again, I feel like Lucas Alexander coming into his UFC debut on short notice, there could potentially be a few UFC jitters as well, especially when you've got a guy on the other side of the cage that's going to be coming at you fast and hard from the get-go. I'm just not sure that Lucas Alexander gets the time in this fight to really get his feet settled, to really get his nerves settled and really start to come into the fight. I think Joanderson Brito is a really good fighter, a well-rounded fighter, a dangerous fighter. maybe having a cardio issue if he does overexert and doesn't get Lucas Alexander out of there late, but at that point he might have took 2 out of the 3 rounds anyway. Again, I just think it's a difficult fight for Lucas Alexander, but I definitely think that Alexander's an exciting fighter, aggressive fighter, a fighter that will get wins inside the UFC. I just think this is a short notice fight that might be a little bit too much for him. So I'm picking Joanderson Brito to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a very intriguing fight. We've got Nick Maximov versus Jacob Malkoun. And this is the epitome of a fight that should be an absolute pick-em, a coin flip, because whichever way you look at this fight, I just don't see any real edge here on either side at all. You've got Nick Maximov striking, which I think, again, you might favour it to him very slightly, but Jacob Malkoun's striking isn't bad either. It's a developing work in progress. And the thing is with Nick Maximov, I think his volume is slightly lower than Jacob Malkoun, so that striking sort of nullifies itself. And when you look at both fighters and the predominant styles, they both prefer to wrestle and then grapple. Definitely, like Jacob Malkoun's had grappling experience, Maximov's had grappling experience in grappling tournaments. Both fighters have completed a good number of takedowns inside the cage as well. Malkoun's completed an insane amount of takedowns and attempted an insane amount of takedowns in his short UFC career to date. So again, I think the wrestling's going to be interesting. I think the grappling's going to be interesting. It's just close wherever you look. And like I say, there's not too many edges. However, I do have to pick a side, and I am going to be siding with Jacob Malkoun in this fight. And the reason why is I like his re-wrestling. So if he is taken down, he'll constantly looking to try and grab that single leg, whereas I think Maximov once he gets a takedown on Malkoun, so I think there'll be takedowns on either side. Once Maximov takes down Malkoun, I think Maximov will be looking to put his focus into his positioning and his grappling, whereas Malkoun will just be looking to re-wrestle, get hold of a single leg and put Maximov on his back. I don't think Maximov's going to have spent much time on his back in his career. I don't think he's going to have that fluid re-wrestling game like Malkoun has. His get-up game, again, he's a good grappler, so I'm sure he's going to be able to find his way back up to his feet, but then Malkoun just stays glued to his opponents and will look to rinse and repeat with the takedowns. And again, I think we're going to see some good scrambles in this fight. I think we're going to see moments where both fighters are on top of each other. It's just, when the fight's down on the mat, I just seem to trust Malkoun a little bit more. And I think he dealt with Brendan Allen quite well, a fight where it was close and there was an argument to say he should have won the fight. And then you look at what Brendan Allen's just done against Jotko, taking him down and taking him out and submitting him in round 1. So again, I just feel like the trust element is more on Malkoun's side, where this fight's going to be won and lost, which I imagine is going to be in the wrestling and grappling department. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jacob Malkoun to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Raphael Assuncao versus Victor Henry. And Assuncao, he is on a decline. He's not the fighter that he used to be. He's been there and fought the best of the best in the division. But like I said, he is definitely on a decline now. And how much of a decline, I'm not too sure. I don't think it's like a rapid one. I still think it's going to be competitive. And I think he's going to be competitive in this fight as well. It's just, the thing is with Victor Henry, even though he's not a young guy himself, he's got an experienced record also. He's just coming off a win against Raoni Barcelos, and we saw what Barcelos did in his last fight. Now, that could have been a one-off fight where it might play out 10 times, and that might only happen once or twice. But Victor Henry is a really difficult fighter. He showed a difficult fighter to deal with, He showed a decent technical striking game in that last fight, but he's also got a very wild and solid submission game as well, where he'll be throwing submissions from bottom. He'll look for sweeps, he'll look for reversals. He's very fast paced and he prefers action fights, where I think as with Assuncao at the minute, especially on a decline, I think he'll want to fight at his own pace. I think he'll want to really set the pace, dictate the range, and just have the fight flow the way he wants to flow it. And I don't think Victor Henry is going to allow for that. I think Victor Henry is going to be the one setting the pace. In regards to the distance, I'm not too sure. I'd assume, again, Victor Henry, with the pace that he's probably going to set, he'll be able to dictate that distance also. And although Assuncao is absolutely the more technical fighter here, wherever the fight goes, again, I just think the fast pace, I think the technical strike and the power that Victor Henry puts behind his strikes is a concern for a decline in Assuncao as well. And the speed, the movement on the feet, and if it hits the ground also, I think is in favour of Victor Henry also. Like I said, I don't think Assuncao is going going to get completely run through in this fight. I don't think it's going to be a whitewash, but I do think that if Victor Henry comes into this fight how he fought against Barcelos, then I think he's going to pick up another win. So I'm picking Victor Henry to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Piera Rodriguez versus Sam Hughes. And Sam Hughes has actually proven a lot of people wrong. She's looking better than what I think a lot of people anticipated she'd look inside the UFC the more that she fights. But again, I think it's really opponent dependent. And against Piera Rodriguez, I think she's a fighter with good boxing. She's aggressive. She's strong in the clinch. She's got a good wrestling game as well. Once she takes her opponents down, she's got a good top side game as well, where she'll lay heavy. She's not submission over position, which is great. And she'll just really try and secure those positions. If her opponent stands back up, she'll either re-wrestle or break off, get back to a boxing, close the distance, and, rinse and repeat again. And I think she's a really good all-round fighter with a lot of skills. Like I said, her boxing's good, her power's good, her combination's good, but then mix it into that wrestling as well. She's a little bit like a female version of Joanderson Brito, which again I feel is a fair comparison with the style and how she mixes things up between that aggression and then shooting into the takedowns. I think Sam Hughes is going to have some moments in this fight for sure. I don't think it's going to be one of those fights that's a complete whitewash, but when you look at the skill set and the quality and the stylistic advantages that Piera Rodriguez is going to have, along with the multiple paths to victory, it's difficult to look past her in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Piera Rodriguez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got an interesting one here between CJ Vergara and Tatsuro Taira. And it's an interesting one because Tatsuro Taira, he was my fighter to watch the last time that he fought inside the UFC on his UFC debut. I do a fighter to watch on all the social medias, the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. So every week, I do pick a fighter that is my specific fighter to watch. Tatsuro Taira definitely fit that bill in his last fight. He's a good prospect. He's a good striker. He's got good wrestling. He's a very dangerous grappler as well. He will find himself in good positions. He's got a good ground and pound game. He's got a good submission game as well. But the reason this fight is interesting is because this is the third fighter now that CJ Vergara has fought or going to fight that has got that hype about him, that's got a bit of a prospect look about him. Ode Osborne, he did lose unanimously, but that fight was much closer than people thought and much closer than the betting line suggested. Then he fought Clayton Rodriguez, who Rodriguez is one of my big prospects. I think he's an unbelievable fighter, really, really high ceiling. CJ Vergara beat him in a split decision, and I did think he deserved that decision win as well. And now CJ Vergara is getting another fighter that I think is a legit, or could be a legit prospect with a relatively high ceiling. So it's a really interesting fight. I think Vergara is one of these fighters that is just game. He's a good striker, he's a good wrestler, he's a good grappler, he'll mix things up as well. I don't think he specialises in any one specific area of MMA, but he's just good enough in every area to be able to cause problems at this level in the UFC. Obviously, if he started hitting the top 20, the top 15, then he would have some troubles because, again, I just don't think he thrives in one specific area. But at this level, I definitely don't think it's going to be a whitewash for Tatsuro Taira. I do think Taira's the better fighter. I think he's more elusive. I think he's faster with his striking and his movement. I think he's got some wrestling about him as well. If he gets taken down by Vergara, I don't think Vergara's going to be able to roll all over him. I think Taira's going to have some good jiu-jitsu enough to be able to get back up to the feet. I think he could potentially take CJ Vergara down. And like I said, I think Vergara's going to be game here. I think he's going to put some good work in. I think he's going to have some good moments. But when you look at the fight as a whole, I think Tatsuro Taira is just going to be more lively here. I think he's going to be a little bit quicker, a little bit smarter with his strikes. I think he's going to mix things up a little bit better. And I just feel that he's got the edge over Vergara in a couple of areas, more areas than Vergara's got over him. And for that reason, I'm picking Tatsuro Taira to win this fight. And finally, in the last breakdown of this episode of the podcast, unfortunately, we've got a fight that, in my opinion, is nowhere close to being UFC caliber. We've got Mike Jackson versus Pete Rodriguez. I don't understand why the UFC keep bringing Mike Jackson back. He's 1-1. He won his last fight. He did get a win in his last fight against Dean Barry, but Dean Barry, again, it wasn't a clean win. It was the eye gouge from Barry, and Barry was teeing off on him, hurt him multiple times in that first round. Barry, to be fair, was gassing out, and there was potentially an opportunity for Mike Jackson, but ultimately he just looked sloppy, untechnical. Barry was having his way with him. Barry, in my opinion, isn't a UFC caliber fighter either. Then you're getting Pete Rodriguez on the other hand. Pete Rodriguez was fed to Jack Della Maddalena in his UFC debut. I think Pete Rodriguez is a dangerous threat. I don't think his skill set and technical ability is UFC caliber, but he's definitely got some vicious knockouts, some heavy hands. And I think that this is the fight that we see Mike Jackson knocked out. I think it's the fight that the last time we see Mike Jackson in the UFC. I do think that he's going to exchange with Pete Rodriguez. I think Pete Rodriguez is going to put a powerful combination together really in this fight, catch Mike Jackson with something and knock him out. And I think that's probably, like I said, that's probably going to be the end of Mike Jackson's UFC career. And like I say, I don't wish for any man or woman to lose the job or anything like that. But when you're looking at UFC caliber fighters and some of the fighters that aren't signed to the UFC, that aren't getting that opportunity because there's guys like Mike Jackson in there and there's levels between those, I think it's difficult to really say anything too nice about Mike Jackson. And again, it's not his fault. Obviously, he's not the one that's forced the UFC to sign him. I just think there's better fighters waiting in the wings out there that's going to be able to replace a person on the roster, and I think that's going to be where we're sitting with Mike Jackson after this fight. Again, I think it's going to be a fight that's probably not going to go too long. I think Pete Rodriguez is going to land something hard. I think he's going to knock Mike Jackson out, and I'm picking Pete Rodriguez to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast and at UFC Vegas 62. It's going to be a really interesting card. Again, as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. If you do, or if you have liked these breakdowns, the analysis, if I've helped you win bets in the past and cash some betting tickets, then again, do me a favor, please hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers as our next milestone. As always, I will be the one replying into the comments. So if you want to tell me who you're betting on, who you parlay in, where you disagree with me or where you agree with me, again, I'll try and reply to all those comments in our YouTube comments as well. Again, thanks for tuning in. I'm Newsome. We'll see you next week.